So my name is Peter-Allan Finlayson. I grew up in the town of Hermanus, which is about 1.5 hours southeast of Cape Town, on the southern, almost the southern tip of Africa. I am third generation winemaker in the Finlayson family. My grandparents were the first. They owned the wine farm that is now called Hartenberg in Stellenbosch. And then to make a long story shorter, my father and uncle couldn't take over from the farm. They lost the farm, and my father started Bushard Finlayson in 1989, and he sold his shares in that farm in 2002. So I didn't take over from him there, and then started Crystallum Wines in 2007. No, I mean, it was never really a dream of mine. I kind of had the opposite impression of what a lot of people do in the wine industry. It was being around my father. He started a new business before the end of apartheid. There was threats of civil war in those days. He was always stressed out because his parents went bankrupt. He didn't have any money, like no capital to start a business with, so had to get a lot of shareholders, a lot of investors involved. So I honestly didn't really want to go into the industry. I ended up studying a degree in philosophy and economics. And then while I was doing that, I realized that my job prospects with that degree were not very good. So I spoke to my dad about the potential of starting up, a wine business. And at that stage, it was the idea of a business and the marketing and the branding and that kind of side of it that interested me more. But because we had to do it on the cheap, I had to make the wines as well. So I did that for the first time in 2007. It didn't go particularly well. I made Chardonnay, Pinot, and Sauvignon Blanc, and the only wine that we could release was the Sauvignon Blanc. I won't go into details about why the others didn't work. But then in the second year, I made the wines, or my second vintage was in 2008. And by that point, I'd actually started becoming interested in winemaking. I'd spent a bit of time in Burgundy and in Priorat, and it was much more successful. And then, I kind of realized that this was something that I really enjoyed. So I'm just very fortunate that I fell into it rather than it ever being a dream of mine. Yeah, I think it was a blessing in terms of being a bit easier to open doors and channels and being able to sell wines, but also a curse because I didn't, you talk about imposter syndrome. Like I had massive imposter syndrome. I didn't have a qualification. The only reason I was doing it was because my dad was kind of helping me do it. So, I felt it was more of a curse at that point. Just didn't feel like I was worthy of being in the industry, and it was pretty difficult and stressful, but I think an amazing opportunity that I had to kind of learn by doing it myself. And I made a lot of mistakes in the beginning, still make a lot of mistakes, obviously, but fortunately, I absolutely love it, and I think I have the energy and a drive and a love for wine and winemaking that's maybe taken me to where I am now. The name came from the fact that at that point we had a share in a farm called Crystallkloof. I'm sure everyone has noticed that there are a lot of wine names in the South African industry that have kloof on the end, and a kloof is a ravine, mountain ravine. So Crystallkloof was a farm where we were going to plant some vineyards. We had a barrel cellar there. We did not have the zoning rights, so we weren't legally allowed to produce alcohol there. So I was making the wine somewhere else and then trucking it over. Anyway, I digress. So the name Crystallum is the Latin for crystal. So this was in 2007. So after I already made my first vintage, I did a harvest in Burgundy and then went to Ibn Sadi, very obviously well-known South African winemaker who was making wine in the Priorat at that stage, and he was using Latin names for his own wines. And I remember I came back home and I'd been like thinking about a name, and we were thinking about using Crystallkloof, but I wasn't sure about it. And then it was the first night that I'd come back from working with Ibn, and I typed into the computer Latin for crystal. And then Crystallum came up, and it was like, oh, that's nice. Yeah. And then we used it, and that's it. Yeah, so my brother is a part owner. Initially, the plan was for him to be more involved in the business as time went by, but he is an architect and a very successful architect. So it hasn't really worked out that way. So he is not really involved in the day-to-day running of the business, but he's still a part owner in the business. And now, if he joined, he'd kind of be working for me, and he's my older brother. So the dynamic would be a little bit difficult. So the original plan was to work with Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, and Pinot. And the first release, as I said, was Sauvignon Blanc, the first successful release. But yeah, it kind of became apparent to me very, very quickly, I think already in 2009, 2010, that we should drop the Sauvignon and focus on Chardonnay and Pinot. Okay, so yeah, also an interesting story, I suppose. The farm was started by my father-in-law. So he bought the property back in 2001, started planting vineyards in 2003. This was during the time that I was still wasting my father's money at university. And I was making wine, making Crystallum, renting Seller's Place in Botcheva, so close to where Gabriëlskloof is. And the lady of the wife of the winemaker who I was renting space from, she told me that there was a girl in town, and that I might be interested in meeting her. So she arranged a meeting, and we met, and she had a boyfriend at the time, Nicoline, and a month later she didn't have a boyfriend anymore. And we got together, and she made me some vegetable soup, and we've been together ever since. And then around 2014, I had been making my wines in the cellar of Chris, and he was growing, I was growing, and it became clear that I needed to find winemaking space somewhere else. So I went to my father-in-law and I asked him, would he be interested in allowing me to make a bit of wine, letting me make a bit of wine in his own cellar. And he said yes, but he would also like me to take over the winemaking of Gabriëlskloof, and I was a bit hesitant at first. There are potential dangers when it comes to working with one's family and in-laws and wife and father-in-law. So I joined the business then. It was pretty difficult in the beginning, the first couple of years, but it's worked out really well, and yeah, I'm really proud of where the wines are now. It's been a lot of hard work in the vineyards and in the cellar, and new wines, new brands, a lot of new people that we're working with, but it's going well. Yeah, I've always been better at figuring out how to do things with other people than doing everything myself. So I think that kind of trained me well, for the position that I'm in. And we have amazing people working for us, and it means that I delegate more, but I like being more in the big picture stuff role, So harvest, I'm very involved. The picking decisions generally are mine. That's the most important decision that you make in the wine making process. So all the important steps, the tastings, all of those things, I'm very involved with. But I don't clean barrels anymore, which I'm very happy about. I think my philosophy applies to wine and to life is like do as little as is required for the best possible outcome. So, but I think it actually works really well in wine, because the philosophy is really about representing vineyard. So I'm always pushing for elegance. Be it the Bordeaux blend or Syrah, or Pinot and Chardonnay, which is obviously a bit easier. So, and it's about, I suppose, elegance. Nothing. We don't like to have anything that's forced in the wine. We don't use much new oak at all. Wild fermentation for everything, low sulfur. So, yeah, it's about almost focusing on what makes that particular wine, what makes that particular vineyard special and unique, and kind of transferring that into the glass as much as possible. What the drive behind it is, yeah, partly that I'm quite impatient and I have the attention span of a goldfish. So I need to be doing things that I'm excited about, and something like the amphora, which was the first one. I knew that some winemakers, Duncan Savage, Ibn Sadi, Chris Arlight, had been using these beautiful handmade amphora, but they were using it for Chenin and I think some Semillon. And I had a hunch that Sauvignon might be quite interesting, in these vessels. And I've also been thinking a long time about how to make Sauvignon Blanc in a way so that it doesn't really taste like modern Sauvignon Blanc. And we bought some amphora in 2016 for the first time, and I really loved the results. So we've been buying more amphora every year since then, and it's become an incredibly popular wine for us. And we use some incredibly interesting vineyards now, some vineyards in the Citrusdal mountain area, where wines like the Skurfberg from Ibn Sadi and the Hailkrans from Chris Arlight, Magnetic North from Chris Arlight come from. So Sauvignon Blanc from that area, and the wines come together incredibly well. On the whole bunch side, so the whole bunch Syrah, that also started out as an experiment. The idea was to have a spicy, more lifted aromatic component for the Gabriëlskloof Syrah. And then once again, after tasting it, a couple of months into its aging, I was just really kind of excited and surprised by the results. So we bottled a small amount of it, and now it's become quite a big bottling for us and a really popular and important wine for us. No, I have many ideas, and I also need to try and calm myself down and not act on anything. It's important that I think, establish the wines we have at the moment. But there's something that there's a few things that I'm thinking about. I suppose Crystallum is to kind of, carry on pushing the boundaries of quality, as the vineyards get older. We also own some vineyards now with Crystallum, and the plan is to have more security with the vineyards that we have. So our top vineyards, try and have long-term security on those, which is maybe not the most exciting thing, but very exciting for me. Just really refine what we do. I think there's a time when you want to, time to innovate, a time to introduce new wines and all of these things. I think for Crystallum, we might have one or two single vineyards that we will add to the range. But I feel like there's a lot of good about it and what we're doing. So really trying to consolidate and improve on those things. And for Gabriëlskloof, there's also a couple of new things, but really, grow the volumes on the top end. I think that's important. So the landscape series wines that I'm really proud of, that I think are excellent. So look at really increasing the sales of those wines. The whole bunch is something that we can push volumes up on. So, but this is all has to be done, without sacrificing quality. So I'm also really excited about the idea of having something like the whole bunch that we have decent volume of, and that enough people can have access to. It's one thing making 1,000 bottles of an amazing wine, but it's not many people that are going to get to experience that wine. So I'm really excited about the idea of having high volumes of something that's really interesting. I mean, it's, I suppose, the similar answer that you get from everyone. It's kind of unpredictability, so it's obviously not global warming. It's kind of a global climate just changing and becoming much more unpredictable. It's flooding, it's too much water at certain times of the year, but then too much heat and drought at other times, so it's really, I think, trying to work in the vineyards in a sustainable, regenerative way, where as much as possible. So increase the health of the soil life. That increases water holding capacity, increases the acidity and flavor enhancement in the vineyard and in the berries. So that's something that we're focusing on very, very much going forward. So right now, the vineyards are budding. So we are in spring, going into a wonderful summer, which unfortunately is the opposite of what's happening here. Excuse me. And so we are starting with our spray programs, and the pruning is all finished, and getting prepared and excited for the next season. Either with my children, or family, with my wife, or surfing. So surfing is kind of my favorite activity, outside of wine and family. which I don't get to do as much as I'd like to. But yeah, we have a very, well, I suppose very good is maybe an overstatement, but a pretty good surfing beach quite close to where we live. And yeah, it's been something I've been doing for a long time, which I absolutely love.